At the back here is a juniper which I bought from the local garden centre, and it's some kind of Chinese juniper cross media, and it's also variegated as well, which means it has both yellow and green growth on there. Now, I hadn't quite appreciated that for probably the first year and a half that I had it, so I was quite concerned that some of the growth appeared to be yellow, and I was worrying that perhaps it might have an iron deficiency or something, but no, that's just how it grows. Now, this was inspired by a video on the Bonsai U channel by Bjorn Bjorholm, where he takes some young junipers and turns them into beginner bonsais. Just in front here we have a lovely juniper with twisty ram's horn gin on it, and this is a tree which I bought myself on my 50th birthday last year from Adam and Jude at All Things Bonsai. I saw the tree on the website and just fell in love with it, and again it's another tree of a particular size. I really do like those smaller trees. I've not really done much with this, just applied a bit of lime sulphur just to bring out the gins and the shari, but otherwise I've just left it for the time being. Immediately next to that on the bench is another Chinese juniper, and this was in fact one of Corinne's lockdown project junipers from Greenwood Bonsai. And again, not really done a lot with this. I think there were a couple of branches that I trimmed off. Didn't feel they were in the right place or what I was hoping to achieve. And I planted in this lovely pot, again from Tom Butterworth. In the back here is another Cotoneaster with a cascade. And as I've mentioned already, a number of the smaller pots have been knocked off the benches, and so you can see I've done a kintsugi repair on there, and you can see the gold. Now all that was 2-part epoxy resin with a gold powder which I acquired from Amazon, just mixed in with it, and it gives quite an attractive repair. Just at the back here we've got one of a number of single larch trees which I acquired as part of a batch of I think 16 trees from 3 Fat Pigs on either Amazon or eBay, and applied wire to this. You can see, if we zoom in on the branches, got quite twisty branches where the wire was applied. I'm just really letting this thicken up. Planted into a creamy white coloured bonsai pot which I bought from eBay for probably about £15. This is a Chinese holly tree which I bought from Morrison's supermarket for £10, and it's been quite vigorous, but in all honesty it's a bit shapeless and needs something doing with it now. So that's on my list of things to do. Next out on the benches is a Dawn Redwood, which I bought from All Things Bonsai for about £30, which I thought was a really good price. It's a tree that does suffer a little bit in summer. Some of the tips of the leaves do go a bit brown, and it's quite a thirsty tree, which is why it's currently stood on a drip tray, just to make sure that it always has water there. Here is a Picea abies, Alberta conica, so Alberta dwarf spruce. It's not a species that I'm particularly a fan of. What I find is that you apply wire and you can leave the wire on there for a year and remove the wire, and the tree immediately reverts back to its original form. So it's a tree that I think requires a lot of patience to develop any kind of shaping with it. The wire that's on there at the moment has been reapplied probably a couple of times just to try and get some kind of shape. Otherwise it would have just been a straight up and down typical Christmas tree. Here's a Japanese maple seedling, and that's probably about 2 years old, and it's been a bit slow growing, and it looks like this season it's put on a bit of a spurt growth. But perhaps as a word of caution to anybody who's growing anything from seed, it can take a long time before you have anything that you could possibly even consider as a starter bonsai. Here is my big Buddhist pine Polycarpus, which I bought from the Japanese garden Nuki on a holiday there about 2 years ago. And I quite like the sort of literati style look to it. Next to that is a Chinese Fringe, and it develops these lovely spidery red flowers. It does seem to be a little bit of a temperamental plant in that it certainly doesn't like a lot of direct sun, and so I might have to move it to a more shaded spot. Planted in this lovely pot which I got from Tom Butterworth, which has got this red band around it, which I think nicely complements the colour of the leaves and the flowers. This is an Italian Cypress which I grew from seed from one of those bonsai kits, and it's probably the only tree that I've had any success with from one of those bonsai kits. And it's planted up in a little pot that I paid about £12 for on eBay. This is a corkbark Chinese elm which I bought from All Things Bonsai. It's one of those trees I saw on the benches several times as I visited, and just couldn't get it out of my head. I loved the sort of low round canopy on the tree, the fact that it was a small tree, and to me it looks like something that might grow in a swamp. It's a very vigorous tree, and so needs a lot of trimming back from time to time just to keep it under control. But it's a tree which I really love. It's actually sat in a pot which I got from Tom Butterworth again. As I say, he's someone whose pots I really admire. I just love the aesthetics and the sort of wabi-sabi sort of vibe to them. And this pot even has sort of flecks of gold. If you catch it in the right light, it's just a lovely pot. I just need to find a lovely tree to put in it. This Fuji cherry was one of my early bonsai efforts, and it's been a little bit neglected, if I'm honest, this year. But it was grown as a sort of windswept style, and it being a Fuji cherry, you get some lovely sort of dangling white flowers on it in spring. Just behind these on the benches here is my silver birch forest. Now, if you've seen the video that Nigel Saunders and Jonathan Ariston did, it's pretty much a masterclass in how to put together a forest composition, and if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go and find that immediately. Now, I source these trees off of eBay or Amazon, probably about 10 or 12 trees for about £20, and they were perhaps a little bit younger than the ones that they used in their composition, and the trees are attached into the pot on a sort of bamboo wicker frame. And the pot I bought from All Things Bonsai. This is my largest pot, and I paid about £90 for it. So initially it was a matter of planting up the trees into the pot with just the stems and doing a severe trunk chop on them and just letting that develop. And it was a bit of a scary time because it was quite an extreme thing to do for somebody who was relatively new to bonsai. But trust in the process, and what happened was they put out lots of new growth. Now, unfortunately, there is a trunk at the front here which put out some new growth, and I wired that up as a leader, and unfortunately left the wire on that too long. And what happened was the wire began to bite into the bark of the new branch, and it damaged it to such an extent that it strangulated the branch, and I've struggled to get any new growth on there. So effectively this trunk is dead. So I have a couple of candidate trees which I will be looking at replacing in there in spring next year. Back here is another Picea. And it was another sort of typical straight up and straight down Christmas tree type plant until I applied some wire and a guy wire to really bring the trunk down, and it took perhaps 2 years for that to take hold. But it's got a nice twisty shape to it now. At some point soon it will be worthy of a new pot, I think. Here we've got a Hornbeam Forest, and this was a pot of perhaps 10 trees in one pot, which I bought from the hedging section at B&Q, large DIY store chain in the UK. Planted into a 40cm plastic pot which I bought from Amazon, and I'm just letting this develop. Here's another one of the large trees, and this came as part of a batch of about 16 trees which I bought from 3 Fat Pigs on Amazon or eBay. The bulk of those trees I used to make a couple of forests, and I was left with a number of trees, and this was one of them. And so it's planted up as an individual tree, a bit of wire applied to it. You can see it's growing quite vigorously and probably needs trimming back at this time of year. And immediately next to that is one of the forests which I put together out of those trees. This particular one is 5 trees. There was another forest which I will show you shortly with I think 11 trees, but that one has struggled and this year several of those trees appear to have died. This is a large Fuji cherry tree which I bought from RHS Garden Centre at Bridgewater, I think, near Manchester. Now I haven't done anything with it yet, so I've just planted it up. On the bench next to it here, I've got a crabapple tree. Now this tree I bought as part of a batch of trees from the Woodland Trust. You can get various trees from them for probably about £6, and it's a cell-grown sapling which is ready to plant up, but the tree is perhaps only no more than about 2 years old. This particular one I've now had for 3 years, and I'm looking forward to the day when it actually flowers. Now it's got a bit of a odd shape, and I think I perhaps struggle a bit in creating the apex on trees. So you add this sort of S shape, wire it up a bit, and then you get to the top and it's like, well, what now? And I think perhaps this one might need a chop somewhere around about this point. Just to the back of there is a beech forest, and I call this my haunted beech forest. You can see that the trees are quite twisty and gnarled. And again, this was a batch of trees that I acquired in a pot from the hedging section at the local DIY store, and just letting those develop. And just next to this, on the end of the bench, we've got a couple of Japanese maples. This one is a coral bark maple, and just behind that is a Japanese princess, and they're in these baskets which provide a lot of good drainage and air to the roots. And this is the sort of basket that my Katsura maple was planted in to help it develop a really nice nabari. And these will probably sit in here for the next couple of years and see how they develop. And just on the end of my bonsai benches, I've got another display shelf, and in there there's another Alberta Conica spruce. Immediately next to that is a group of 3 Chinese elms in one pot. Now it needs a bit of a trim, it needs the weeds taking out. But I bought this from the local garden centre, and there were the 3 trees in the one pot for just £12, which I thought was a bargain. So I had thought about perhaps separating them out, but I think I quite like the look of the 3 of them together, and so I call these the 3 sisters, and it puts me in mind a bit of Macbeth and the witches in Macbeth. I just wanted to mention this particular portion of the garden, which is where effectively I ground grow trees. So under the soil here, perhaps about 5 inches deep, there is a grid of concrete paving slabs, and the idea is that the trees have access to all the rainwater and the nutrients they need, but the roots can't penetrate through, and so they end up having to grow in a radial pattern. And ground growing the trees helps them thicken up quicker. So in here at the moment there's a larch which has always struggled, At the back there is an oak tree, there's a silver birch, a crab apple and a Dishojo maple in there, and I'm just really leaving them there for the next couple of years to do their own thing and seeing how they develop, with a view to being future bonsai. Over here I have 3 bonsai display stands or monkey poles, and they're a lot like a sort of bird table shape, and they just provide an elevated display for some of the trees. Over here we've got a juniper with a cascade effect. Now I believe this may well have been my very first bonsai tree. Now it's had some wire applied on it but taken off this season, and I think it just needs some more wire just to add some shape back into it. So these should be a more of a sort of curvy shape there, cascading out of the pot. Next to that is a forest of Japanese maple, orange dream variety, and it's done very well this year, apart from this one tree which has died, and that may well be because the tree was a bit close to the edge of the pot. So next spring I need to find a replacement for that tree. Just behind that is a forest of 11 Acer Palmatum Purpuria. Now it's a tree which tends to have a larger leaf size, so it doesn't readily lend itself to great bonsai, but this one tends to develop quite nicely through the season, and is just generally slowly coming on. So that's 11 trees, each of which cost me £3 from the local supermarket, planted into a pot which I think cost £35 from All Things Bonsai. Immediately next to this we have a cork bark elm planted over rock, which I bought from Adam at All Things Bonsai. Again, this is one of those trees I'd seen several times on the benches, and it just kept speaking to me, and eventually I succumbed, and for my birthday this year I bought it. Now it reminds me of a face hugger from the Alien films, and you can see from the canopy it's quite a vigorous grower, and again it's one of those trees that needs trimming back several times through the year, and this one is overdue. Immediately next to that is a typical Chinese elm, which my brother bought me for my 50th birthday last year, and again it's grown quite vigorously this year. It was quite slow last year, I suspect because I repotted it, but it certainly needs trimming this year, otherwise this growth is going to get really coarse. Just down here we've got a red garnet Japanese maple planted in the ground. This is just a garden tree. Immediately next to that is a hornbeam. Now I bought this from the local garden centre. It was a tree that was about 6 foot tall, and knowing that I wanted to turn it into a bonsai, brought it home, immediately reduced it to about 9 inches tall. You can see just in there where I made the initial trunk chop, and I've applied some wire to the branches to try and position those, and again it's grown quite vigorously and is in need of some attention now. Just in here is a Azalea, which is just a garden centre Azalea, which has a lovely red flower, and it's planted in this lovely studded pot. It's one of my favourite pots. I really love the patina and the look of it, and it really complements the flowers very well. Here is an oak tree which I've grown from seedling. Now it's about 2 years old, and I've planted it into a pond basket and just wired up and trimmed some of the growth, and it's probably in need of a bit of attention now. Just see if what needs doing to take it forward. Immediately next to that is my Greenwood Azalea bonsai. So when Corinne did the initial video on azaleas, I immediately jumped on the website and bought one. And the flowers on this, they tend to be a sort of candy pink and white striped flower. And you can see this time of year the flowers have now gone over and it's in need of those trimming and taking off to set the tree up for next year. Here's a Maiden hair or Ginkgo tree, which I bought from a garden centre in Doncaster. It's got a bit of a strange corkscrew twisty trunk, which is not ideal, but I'm just going to let it grow and see how it develops. Now immediately next to it here we've got a copper beech tree which has struggled and looks like it's died this year. I think I couldn't keep up with the watering requirements for it. And immediately next to that is the larch forest, which I mentioned previously, that was struggling, and I think to all intents and purposes is probably a bonsai failure. I might be able to rescue one of the trees in there, and obviously I can always reuse the pot. Over here there's a recent acquisition which was a Wisteria. Now it appears to have struggled in this pot. It was initially stood on the patio, which was perhaps a bit too warm for it, and I think the pot dried out too quickly. So I moved it up here where it's next to another which has thrived. So hopefully that will recover. Immediately next to that is a tray of Japanese maple seedlings. And just leaving those to do their thing. And at some point we'll have to pick those out and put them in individual pots. And behind that is an Irene Japanese maple. Again, I've just planted it in a basket to try and help develop the roots, and it will probably be in there for the next couple of years. Next to that is a silver birch, and that was one of the trees that I got in the batch of trees that I bought from the Woodland Trust. And it's a good place for sourcing different types of native species trees if you want lots of cheap trees. Just in the corner here there's an apple tree, which is just a garden tree, and a Fatsia japonica in the corner. On the table here there's a Chinese elm, which again was a birthday present this year. Next to that is a Japanese maple butterfly variety. It's a variegated tree. That means that it's a very slow grower, and it's in an Evelyn Chambers pot. Which I bought from Facebook. Just at the back there is a beech tree, just slowly growing away. And here's the triple trunk cherry tree, Fuji cherry, that I separated as an heirloom from the smaller tree which I showed you earlier. So here we are at the rockery at the back of the garden, and there's a couple of trees on here just left to their own devices. There's a Mugo pine here which I've struggled to do anything with, so I just left it to do its thing. I'm not sure it's a particularly promising tree. Next to that is a Japanese white pine, which is another tree which I got from All Things Bonsai. Next to that is a cheap garden centre Azalea mass-produced bonsai. It hasn't put any flowers out this year, so just keep an eye on that and see how that develops. Immediately next to that is a Pseudolarix golden larch, which was a £10 tree from a supermarket, and it's developed quite nicely. It's one of those trees that in autumn it has a fairly spectacular sort of final burst of colour as all the foliage turns a sort of gold colour and looks like exploding fireworks. It's a really, really pretty tree in autumn. Here's another garden centre juniper, which I added wire to give it a bit of shape, and created a gin on there. It's been fairly slow grower and appears to have quite a bit of juvenile growth on there still, so I just leave it to its own devices and see how it develops. And these are my final couple of trees to show you. First of all, this is an Azalea, which is the final plant that came from the batch where I separated 4 plants out from the one pot. Now this particular plant, when we first developed the pond, was blown into the pond in a storm, and I didn't notice that the plant was missing for probably about 2 weeks. So incredibly, this plant survived at the bottom of the pond for 2 weeks. And next to that, the final tree. This is my larger Discourageur maple, which I bought from Adam and Jude at All Things Bonsai. And you can see it's been quite a vigorous grower. It's probably in need of trimming now, so I need to go through and review that. But that's all the trees on my bonsai benches, so I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any comments, please leave them below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.